Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. It's going to be an exciting show today, but before we start, I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for the introduction. You can find him and his amazing wife at nativestorytellers.com. Check it out. It's a way of preserving history that a lot of us aren't used to, but a way that should really be paid attention to. Today, I have Ahmed Osman as a guest, and he is an Egyptian-born author. He's put forward a number of theories, some revisionist in nature, about ancient Egypt and the origins of Judaism and Christianity. His latest book, The Egyptian Origins of King David and the Temple of Solomon, is an investigation into the real historical figure of King David and the real location of the Temple of Solomon. It identifies King David as Pharaoh Tuthmosis III of the 18th dynasty, and David's son Solomon as Pharaoh Amenhotep. Big words for me here. Tuthmosis' successor. He also shows how the Temple of Solomon, described in the Bible, corresponds with the Mortuary Temple of Luxor in Egypt, and explains how David was not a descendant of Isaac, but his father, and how biblical narrators changed the original story of Abraham and Isaac to hide his Egyptian identity. I've read the book. It's fabulous, and even if you don't have a great biblical background, the story flows amazingly, and what is so amazing about this book is it gives you the different passages and books, and it gives you the opportunity to play I doubt it, to go back to the Bible, and to look at history and the Egyptian connection. So it's not meant to in any way change your religious belief system, but it is a book that puts out actual archaeological material that gives a different story. It hopefully, in many ways, makes you ask questions. It doesn't in any way try to change your faith. It just gives you an idea as to alternative reasons for the history that we've been given, and it's an amazing book. I highly recommend it. He's written a number of other books, all of which hopefully I will have time to read and bring to you because the information is really profound. Welcome to the show, Ahmed. I'm so delighted to have you here today.
Thank you for inviting me to talk to you. Yeah.
Oh, no, I could, live on your front porch and talk to you forever. The books that you've written are an amazing journey in seeking out archaeological facts and then trying to correlate them with the biblical story. And it's an amazing journey. What started you on this journey?
Yeah, what started me personally is the fact that I was born in Egypt in 1934. By the time I was 14 years of age, the United Nations decided to divide the land of Palestine into two states, one Jewish state and one Arab state. At the time, I was a little bit more involved in the fanatic Islamic kind of groups. Although I was young, they usually start with young people like me. I was 14 years of age, and they told me and other people like me that if we were, to go and fight, it was 1947, if we fight the Jews and stop them establishing a Jewish state in Palestine, we have only two options, either to kill the enemies of God, the Jews, or to die as martyrs and go to heaven straight away. At the time, I liked the idea, so I wanted to join the groups, going there. However, luckily for me, they did not accept me because I was underage, 14. They would not accept anybody under 16. Now, eventually, when I grew up and went to university and studied, I went out of this kind of Islamic fundamental ideas, and I started to learn history and philosophy and so on. And although the conflict between Egypt and Israel became more dominant in my life and the life of my country. So this time, instead of going to war, I decided I have to see the origin of this conflict. Why? In Europe, for instance, during the Second World War, Germany on one hand, Britain and France on the other hand, they fought each other for about 4 years. However, when the war came to an end, they sat down and they made it up, then they became friends. I wonder why were we unable to do the same thing between us and Israel. So I thought it must be something in our common origins. There's some kind of taboo which makes us unable to cross this barrier, you see. So I started to read the Bible, because as a Muslim, we don't read the Bible. We only read the Quran and so on. And so I started to read the Bible and the book of Exodus and the book of so on. And then I wondered, I realized that they came to Egypt, the Hebrew tribe came to Egypt as a small tribe. And then because of Joseph's connection with Pharaoh, when he was able to interpret his dreams, he is appointed as a minister of Egypt, in Egypt, by Pharaoh. And then eventually, the Jacob and his family came to Egypt to join Joseph. So Moses was born in Egypt, and according to the Bible, and brought up in the royal palace, and then eventually took the Israelites out of Egypt. So, they became as a small Hebrew tribe, and they left Egypt as a great nation with the Bible. The Bible was given to Moses on the Mount Sinai in Egypt. So I thought there must be something in that common history of origin, something that took place that make us, unable to communicate in the modern. It's a kind of a taboo, as Freud says. Some trauma happened. So I thought, all right, one of two things. If the biblical account was just a mythology, mythological, with no historical, then we have to understand that. But if the story is really historical, have historical roots, then I should be able to find the evidence of these stories in historical account. Now, up to the mid-19th century of our time, about a little bit over 150 years ago, all our knowledge of ancient Egypt came from the Bible. Pharaoh and Moses and Joseph and so on, and some Greek classical authors and so on. Only from the mid-19th century, European archaeologists went to Egypt and the Levant, Palestine and so on, to dig. the main reason, really, they went to dig the early archaeologists was not to find the ancient Egyptian history, that to find evidence to verify, to confirm the biblical story of Moses and Joseph and so on, and the Exodus. The Exodus is the cornerstone of the Bible. So they came and they dug and so on. Eventually, they brought up many archaeological monuments and facts and mummies and so on, as well as a lot of written documents, scripts, and eventually with the French Champollion having been able to decipher the hieroglyphic language, now, I mean, they started to be able to read. So we have evidence from ancient history, pharaonic times, to tell us all the story of Egypt at these different periods, you see. If this story of Moses and Joseph in Egypt and so on were historical, then I should find evidence of it from historical sources. So this made me leave. Yeah. So this made me leave my country. Yes?
Oh, yeah.
Hello?
Please keep going.
Yeah, this made me decide to leave my country in Egypt because I went, first of all, after reading the Bible and so on, I went to the the Egyptian Museum. I mean, I saw many monuments and so on, and I saw some names and dates, but no story. No, I mean, there's no story for me to read. I mean, to research and so on. So I decided to leave Cairo and come to London. I came to London in 1965, and I started by joining the Egypt Exploration Society, who organized an evening course for ancient Egyptian history and language with the London University. I joined that for six years. Then I started I realized that the translation of the Hebrew Bible is different sometimes in the King James translation than in for instance, the New International Version in America and so on. So I decided to learn a little bit of Hebrew so I can get the original Hebrew words so I understand it, and so I don't get the wrong translation. So I know that. And then I started to look. I mean, like everybody else, I realized that all these international archaeologists who dug in Egypt and Palestine and the Levant and so on, they were following, because they came from, they came from an biblical origin. They wanted to find the evidence of the Bible stories. So they took the Bible stories as it is written as a kind of historical facts, which means that the chronology of the Bible, I mean, for instance, the Bible says that the Exodus from Egypt, the Israelites remained in Egypt for 430 years. So, I mean, so they looked at the time of the Exodus, which they thought to be, about during the time of Merembetah and the 19th dynasty, and they went back for 130 years to find the time of Joseph and so on. They, accordingly, they didn't find anything, neither in Egypt nor in Palestine, Israel now, and so on. The archaeologists so far, if you go to, modern archaeologists' conclusions, they found no evidence of Moses, of Joseph, of the King David, the empire of King David, and Solomon. All these characters, which supposed to be historical, they found no evidence of that, because I think they will look according to biblical chronology. The Bible says that, for instance, that although Abraham lived during the 15th century BC, King David lived during the 10th century BC. So when the archaeologists dug in the area, because the Book of Samuel and the Book of Kings mention that King David established an empire extending between the Euphrates, Nile Euphrates, northern Syria, and the Egyptian borders. So, and they mention these biblical writing mention some specific locations, cities that were destroyed, palaces that were established, built, and so on. So they were the archaeologists looked at the level of the 10th century BC to find evidence of the destructions or the buildings, and they found nothing. No evidence, no single evidence of any biblical story have ever been found now. So the conclusion now, of these archaeologists, is that the Moses story, Moses was never in Egypt, and the Exodus didn't exist historically, and David never existed, and so on. So, but I took a different approach, really. I think that the Bible, I came to the conclusion that the Bible, the core of the biblical stories is historical. Because I followed a different route of my research. Rather than following the chronology of the Bible, the time that things took place, I looked for the events itself. When did the empire was between the northern Euphrates to the Egyptian borders exist? When was, the Hebrews living in Egypt? And when, I looked for these things, you see, for the events themselves, rather than the time given in the Bible. I tried to find the time of these events in history. So I came to a different conclusion completely. And what helped me, eventually at the end of the day, in the beginning, I thought, like everybody else, that the first contact between the Egypt, the royal pharaonic palace in Egypt, and the Israelites took place during the time of Joseph, the patriarch of the coat of many colors, when he was able to I thought this was the beginning of the contact, you see. So eventually I realized there was an earlier contact and more important contact between the Hebrews, the Hebrew tribe, and the royal palace in Egypt. In the book of Genesis, there is a story, interesting story, because they say that Abraham, who is supposed originally to have come from southern Mesopotamia, from Iraq of today, and migrated into Canaan, which is Palestine, Israel today. There was a famine in the land of Canaan at the time of Abraham. So Abraham decided to take his wife Sarah and go to Egypt. Egypt has the Nile Valley and so on. There was a great, richness in Egypt during this period. So he went to Egypt. But before he went across the border in Egypt, he told Sarah, his wife, don't say that you are my wife, because the Egyptians might find you fair and beautiful and so on, and they want to take you from me. They might kill me to take you. So say you are my sister. Eventually, as the story goes on, his worries became true, because the officers of Pharaoh saw Sarah in the city, how fair she was. Although the Bible says she was 90 years, but eventually, she couldn't have been 90 years, because Pharaoh invited Abraham and Sarah to his royal palace, and he wanted to marry her. And Abraham agreed, accepted. So Pharaoh gave her a lot of treasure as a dowry to the hand of Sarah, and he married her. This story could not have been invented by the biblical narrators, because it's a shameful account. They would not have written this story unless it has some original history, because you see, it is a shameful thing to talk about Abraham giving his wife to be married to another man. Anyhow, eventually, Pharaoh of Egypt, according to the Bible, realized that, there was something wrong. So he asked for Abraham to come, and he told him, why did you tell me she was your sister? So I married her. Because according to Egyptian moralities at the time, a man cannot take another man's woman, you see. Mm-hmm. So it was a kind of a sin for him. So he asked him, take your wife, Sarah, and go back to Canaan, and this is it, you see. Now, when Sarah eventually went back to Canaan, she gave birth to a boy, Isaac. Now, the question arises, whose son was Isaac? Sarah was married to Pharaoh and to Abraham, and she gave birth to Isaac after being married to Pharaoh. So a strange thing happened to, when I read this story of the Bible, that Abraham, after all these years, wanting a son and so on, as soon as the boy was born, he took him to Jerusalem. It was not called Jerusalem at the time. He took them to the rock, holy rock on the Temple Mount, and he wanted to sacrifice him too. He wanted to kill him, just because he had a dream. He thought in a dream that and the Lord told him, don't do that, don't kill him, and he gave him a lamb to sacrifice. So a normal human being would not do that to his son, you see, unless he thought this is a kind of a son of sin of some kind. And then again, in the Talmud, the story says, there is a story in the Talmud that says, Jewish Talmud, that when Abraham celebrated the birth of his son, the people of the town laughed and said he doesn't even look like him. Now, why should the Talmud keep this kind of memory? Then again, we find strange things, according to the Bible, happening to Abraham. While Isaac was still unborn, before his birth, the Lord appears to Abraham and tell him, I will make a covenant with you. This is the first covenant between the Lord and the Hebrews. That you, as an old man, and all the male characters in your house should be circumcised. So the only thing the Lord asked for this covenant is he should be circumcised. Up to that time in history, only Egyptian males were circumcised. No other nation was circumcised. So in a way, this covenant is to Egyptianize the Hebrews. This was a strange thing for me. I wanted to know whose son was Isaac. Then again, the Lord appeared to Abraham, and after the birth of Isaac, and tell him, to your descendants, I give the land from the Nile, river Nile, to the river Euphrates. This was the extension of the land of the pharaonic empire. You see, why should Abraham at the time had Ishmael from Hagar, the Egyptian maid, and had 6 other male children from another wife he had called Keturah, from northern Hijaz, from southern Palestine. He had another wife, so he had another 7 children, 7 boys. However, the Lord said him, only Isaac and his descendants will inherit this land. So this was the inheritance of the Egyptian empire. So all this indicated to me or confirmed to me that the boy Isaac was not the son of Abraham, but the son of Pharaoh. So if we look, we try to know, was the Pharaoh that married Sarah, we have to go back to the same time when Abraham was living. We know that the Hebrews appeared for the first time in Canaan during the 15th century. And then we know also from the documents written in Egyptian texts and so on, that they came, the Habiru and Habiru came to Egypt during the time of the 18th dynasty. So the Pharaoh who established the empire between the first Pharaoh to establish the empire, the first empire at all to be established between the Euphrates and the Nile, was established at the time of the 15th century, the same time of Abraham coming to Egypt in the 15th century, was called Tuthmosis III. Tuthmosis III. Tuthmosis III. I started to think about, it was Tuthmosis III who married Sarah. Okay, if we look at the name of Tuthmosis III, the first letter, the first part, Mos is the son. Tuthmos is the son of Tuhut. Tuhut is the Egyptian word for Hermes. Greek Hermes is Tuhut, the god of knowledge and magic and so on. So he was, Tutankhamun, for instance, the hieroglyphic part of Tut in Tutankhamun is different than the hieroglyphic part in Tut of Tuthmosis. In Tutankhamun, Tut means the image of. Tutankhamun, the image living of Amun, the living image of Amun. While the Tut of Tuthmosis III is Tuhut, which is a god of knowledge and magic in ancient Egypt. Now, the ancient Egyptian T becomes a D in Hebrew. The Egyptian T becomes a D in Hebrew. So if you read the Egyptian Tut, in Hebrew it becomes Dud. And Dud is the very name of David in the Bible. Dud is the Hebrew word for the name is the same. Okay. If we look now at the same battles, cities destroyed, battles conducted by King David according to the Bible when he established his empire, we find, although the archaeologists did not find any evidence of it in the level of belonging to the 10th century BC, they found exactly every single detail of these destruction and building in another level, or 5 centuries earlier in the 15th century BC. So the Bible was talking about the empire established by Tuthmosis III in the 15th century BC, according to the archaeological evidence. All the evidence confirm that the empire, the Bible says David constructed, existed during the time of Tuthmosis III, who is David of the Bible. Not only that, although we know that David was started as a young shepherd and singer and a harp player and so on, and then he was taken by the king to entertain him until he challenged Goliath, the mighty Goliath, the Philistine Goliath, who challenged the Israelite for fight. Nobody dared to fight him, and this young lad came out and challenged him and beat him. So he became a hero, you see. And then he is supposed, after the death of the king, he went to Jerusalem with his 600 men and so on. And then he went out to establish his empire. And the Bible here although we know his background, he was a shepherd, and so on. He was a young guy. The Bible says David went out to recover the borders of his empire in the northern Syria. Which empire to recover here? There's no mention. But if we go to Tuthmosis III, we know that his grandfather, Tuthmosis I, did conquer all the land up to the Euphrates and established his own name in the northern thing. But because Tuthmosis I, who went all the way to northern Syria, did not leave any military garrison to keep the empire collapsed. So, in fact, Tuthmosis III went out to recover the borders of his father's empire, while David the shepherd did not have an empire to recover. But the Bible states that. So, even the biblical account, although, giving the wrong chronology of events and so on, but it has the historical fact, the memory of the Bible. The Bible we have today, the Hebrew Bible, was written in Babylon during the 6th century BC, because the Hebrew language itself did not exist at the time of Moses during the 14th century BC. Moses lived in the 14th century BC. At that time, there was no Hebrew writing, Hebrew written language. Hebrew came from the Phoenician language, which has the same root for the Greek language and European language, is the Phoenician alphabet language. And Hebrew came from, and Aramaic came from this language. The earliest shape of it came in the 10th century BC. So during the Moses time, there was no Hebrew. So the Ten Commandments was not written in Hebrew, but in Egyptian language, because it didn't exist at the time. Anyhow, when Moses died, Moses was not allowed, according to the Bible, to enter the Promised Land. He died and buried under the mountain somewhere in northern Sinai, and he was not allowed to enter the land. This is according to the Bible. So, in fact, what happened is the 6th century BC, the biblical narrators sat down. After the death of Moses, the Israelites went back on the Mosaic law. They worshipped Ashtaroth and Baalim according to the Bible. They worshipped other gods, and the different prophets came to them every now and then, trying to remind them of the teaching of Moses and so on. Most of them were killed by the kings and so on. So they went back. So when Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, defeated Judea in about 550 BC, and took the upper class and the priests and so on, prisoners in Babylon, they sat down and they say, why is all this happening to me? Maybe because we abandoned the Mosaic teaching, maybe the God is punishing us, the God of Moses. So it was then that they sat down and they wrote the Torah, which is the 5 earlier part of the Old Testament. The Torah, 5 books, Pentateuch. They sat down to write it. What they had at the time as a source of knowledge was some stories transmitted more, orally, generation after generation, and some other stories separately written from different sources in Babylonian, in Egyptian, whatever it is. And they gathered all this and they wrote it down according to their own, they edited the knowledge according to their own belief and understanding of the time. So eventually, although they got the core of the story there, the story is there, and it is historical. Yes, it is historical, but they put it in the wrong time and the wrong place. And because although at the time of Joseph and Abraham and so on, it was the relationship between the Hebrews and the Israelites were close friendship between the royal palace of Egypt and the Israelites. At the time of the Exodus, it was different because they came during the 18th dynasty. And when the 18th dynasty came to an end and the Amarna kings came to an end, came to an end, the 19th dynasty Ramesside kings were hostile to this. I mean, they regarded this as foreign kind of people. They didn't they were hostile. So at the time of Exodus, there was a kind of enmity and conflict between the Israelites and the Egyptian part. So this is the memory that made both sides. The Egyptian side tried to hide everything of the account of the story from historical sources, and on the other hand, the Hebrews tried. They wouldn't say that our grand ancestor was an Egyptian pharaoh, because according to my conclusions, if Pharaoh was the father of Isaac, and his mother obviously was Sarah the Hebrew, so Isaac had a Hebrew mother, Sarah, and Tuthmosis III, whom I identify as King David of history, as his father. So then Isaac brought up, his son was Jacob, and Jacob took the title of Israel. So in this case, Israel was the grandson of Pharaoh, and the Israelites are descendants of both sides, a Hebrew mother and that's why, again, I can tell you of the fact that since that time, the time of Isaac, the birth of Isaac, until now, until today, a boy can be, or a girl, a child cannot be regarded as a Jew unless his mother was a Jew, regardless of the father. Because of Sarah being the mother, of all the family, not Abraham, you see. They wanted to hide this fact, but it remains in different, evidence of it remains in different places. So I think that rather than King David being the grandson of Isaac, he in fact was his father. And in my book I say that in the beginning that Israel is the illegitimate son of Egypt, who challenged his father to accept him. The whole thing. Once we get away from biblical chronology, we find all the stories of the Bible fits. You see, and then obviously we know that Tuthmosis III established the empire. Mm-hmm. There is another kind of similarity I have to tell you. The spiritual kind of King David, a magical kind of event in his life. King Tuthmosis III, in Egyptian inheritance of the crown of the royal family, the line goes through the female line, not the male line, because they believed in the holy birth of the Pharaoh. So when Pharaoh gets married, marry a woman, he has to go first to the temple and sit and stand up in a square down, and then he is washed by holy water and by perfumes and different oils and so on. And then while the priests are doing that, they chant, have different chants and sing, asking for the spirit of Ammon to come and dwell in his body. And when they see a sign, they think that the Ammon spirit came to the body of the king. They put the crown of Ammon on the head of the king, and he is allowed to go and make love to his wife. So the child is born as a son of Ammon spiritually, and the son of the king physically. This is the way. I mean, this story is written and depicted in pictures in the Luxor temple and in Hatshepsut temple in Luxor, step by step. However, they believed that if the woman the king married was not the heiress, the daughter, the eldest daughter of the or the elder of the pharaoh, if she was not the heiress, the spirit of Ammon will not come to dwell in the body of the king, so the child born to her will not be the legitimate son of Ammon. And so, because they believed that the two lands of Egypt belonged to Ammon, to the god Ammon, nobody could sit on the throne of Egypt unless he was the son of Ammon, who owns the land of Ammon. This is the idea. Tuthmosis III, when he was born, his father, in fact, married Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was the daughter of the heiress. So when Tuthmosis II, the father of Tuthmosis III, married Hatshepsut, the heiress, he had the right to the throne. However, he got Tuthmosis III not from Hatshepsut, the heiress, but from another woman called Isis, who was an elderly woman. So he didn't have the right to follow his father on the throne unless Hatshepsut would let him marry her daughter, because her daughter, the daughter of the heiress, becomes the new heiress. But Hatshepsut refused to marry her daughter to the son of her husband from another woman, Isis. So he had no right to follow his father on the throne. In order to get around this objection of his wife, Amenhotep, Tuthmosis II, made a kind of ceremony in the temple of Ammon at Karnak to allow the god Ammon to adopt Tuthmosis III, his son. He was a young boy at the time. So he took the lad into the temple, and the priest of Ammon carried the image of Ammon in a boat, and they marched around the temple, and then they came to the lad, and they took the priest, obviously carrying the boat, or the image of the boat. They took him to the place where the throne of the royal throne is, and they put him there, a sign of Ammon adopting him. And then again, this account is written, the king himself, after he became a king eventually, Tuthmosis III, wrote the story of his life on the walls of Karnak temple. And he mentioned the fact of some kind of a spiritual journey to heaven. He said that after this event, after he was put, to sit down on the throne in the temple, he was ushered to heaven. He went to heaven, and there he met with Ra. The Ra is the old deity of Egypt, the sun god of Egypt. And the Ra himself in heaven, in the stars, took the serpent, the serpent in Egypt is a sign of royalty, which is fixed on the crown of the king. He took the serpent and put it on his forehead. So Ra himself appointed him in a kind of a spiritual journey to heaven. You see, so in order to confirm that he was adopted by God himself, by the heaven himself, I gave him the crown of Egypt, not himself. So this is a strange thing, because we have, in fact, this story is repeated again in the kind of, stories about, not in the Talmud and the Midrash and so on. There are some, stories in the Jewish traditions, Midrashim and so on. This story is mentioned about Abraham being taken to heaven again, you see. And then again, even Muhammad in the Quran, Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, is also, because he was challenged by his people who did not accept him and who tried to kill him and so on. And he, after the death of his wife who supported him and his uncle, he was in a desperate way. And then the Quran said he had this vision of going to heaven, and the God confirmed him as so this journey to heaven, first mentioned in the account of the Karnak of Tuthmosis III, was given later to Abraham in the Jewish traditions, and also to Muhammad in the Quran. Anyhow, I want to tell you that this is a very important thing, because you see, even in the Christian traditions, David is the father of. When Mary, according to the Gospel of Luke, when the angel came to Mary, he told her, "You will give birth to a child. He will be the son of David, who will sit on his throne." He's a Davidic. He's a Davidic line. David. Jesus comes from David the king, who should be a king. The very fact that the Messiah is the anointed one is. Jesus is supposed to be a king. You see, although the gospel doesn't take this seriously. And they only introduce this baptism by John. But according to the angel and the Gospel of Luke, he told her, your son will be the son of David, who will sit on his throne. This is an earthly throne. And the Son of God, who will sit next to God. You see, he is the son of both. Exactly in the same way as the Egyptian tradition regards. Anyhow, and also, you see, at the end of days, the messianic kind of belief is that the son, the returning Christ, will fight the Armageddon. The battle of, between good and evil, the final battle between good and evil, would be done in Armageddon. The mountain the mountain on the shore of Mediterranean in Israel, in northern Israel, a mountain and a city called Armageddon. Har is a mountain. Mageddon means glory. In Egypt, Mageddon is the glory mountain. And strangely enough, because you see, this is the battle, the original battle between good and evil that his grandfather David fought. Now we find the historical account of the wars of Tuthmosis III. Hatshepsut, after the death of Tuthmosis II, this is the mid-18th dynasty Egyptian history. When Tuthmosis III died, Tuthmosis II died. Tuthmosis III, his adopted son by God Amun, was only a young lad. So Hatshepsut, his mother-in-law, became announced herself as a queen with him as a king, a kind of co-regency. But she was old and he was young. She was dominating the throne. She put him in the background all the time. And when she died, eventually, he became alone. He started his wars to re-establish the empire of his grandfather, Tuthmosis I. So he went out. He started by going to Gaza, and then he marched north to the major battle at the time when the Palestine, Canaan, and Syria, there was no kind of state called Syria or Palestine. This is the land of the Levant, had many hundreds of small towns. Every town is a state on itself. So 300 prince and king gathered together in Armageddon. There was a fortified city near the Mount of Mageddon. They gathered around this area because they expected Tuthmosis III to come from Egypt to regain his empire, his father's empire, over the place. So they gathered there, and between him coming from the south on the coast, Mediterranean coast, there was this huge mountain he has to cross and to come to the city, fortified city, and meet these people. They stood in front of the castle waiting for it to come. So his visitors came and asked him, "Now, our Lord, we have trouble here. We have two routes to reach the town. Either we go around the mountain and fight them, or we have to go up the mountain and cross, but there's only a narrow road to lead us there. So if we go through this narrow road, it would be a soldier behind the soldier behind the soldier. So our front will be there and our rear will be back. So it will be a difficulty. But you decide, our Lord." So he said he preferred to go over the mountain, although this was a difficult one, because he said, in this case, we can come behind them waiting, his enemies waiting in front of the city, and surprise them, rather than coming from facing him in front, and then they are ready to face him, and it would, and then they did exactly as he said. They crossed. They said, "You are the Son of God. You know better. You must have." They followed him, and they crossed, and they waited. At the end of the road, they waited until they gathered, and then Tuthmosis ran down with his chariot, and followed by the side behind the waiting princes and kings of the 300 of them. Their names are written on the Karnak wall, and they were frightened. They ran away. They were surprised by his surprise attack, and they went into the city and closed the door. And this was the fighting of the things. So what happened at the time? He encircled. His army encircled the town until surrounded, and he went to what the city of Jerusalem at the time. It was called Quddush, Qadesh. It was called Qadesh. Qadesh means holy. The city, it was not a city, it was a minor thing, but because of the natural, at the time, the local people, including the Hebrews and so on, the way they worship, they go on top of a mount and they have a kind of a rocks on top of them in a kind of, and they pour oil on this rock and they worship there. So in Jerusalem there was a natural rock coming out of the ground, a high rock, you see. So it was a natural area, a holy area for all the people of the area of Canaan, you see. So I mean, Tuthmosis III went to the city, which was, I mean, with his men, his guards and so on, and stayed there for 7 months until the city, I mean, his army took the city. He went to. The thing is, when Tuthmosis III went out from Egypt with his army, he took the image of Amun, his god Amun, in front of the army being carried in a boat, Egyptian boat, holy boat. And when he went to Jerusalem, he took this image of his god Amun, and obviously being stationed in the holy area, in the holy rock, he put this rock, the image of his god, on the holy rock of Jerusalem while he was there. Because every morning, I mean, the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of the Lord in the Egyptian tradition, in the Jewish tradition, in the Mosaic tradition, obviously was a repetition because Moses, I mean, used the same ark, the same boat, the same ark, but it did not have the image of God because Moses, God does not have any image. So he put the Ten Commandments, the tablets, instead in it. But Tuthmosis III took in his ark of his Lord, he took the image of Amun and he placed it there. And he was the first, obviously, royal character to make this area his worshipping place, which was called Kadesh at the time. When the army, I mean, after 7 months, his army sent him a message that come and take the city, and he took all the city, and he took all these 600, the whole area collapsed in front of him, and they gave him, I mean, gold and whatever it is. So this was a battle between Tuthmosis, whom I called as David, historical David, who defeated all the gathered kings of the whole land in front of him, and in the messianic belief that the Messiah, the returning Messiah, will have to fight the same Armageddon, the same battle of Armageddon of his grandfather. So Tuthmosis is not or David is not only for the Israelites and the Jews, it is even more important for the Christian who believe in the returning Christ and so on. Anyhow, again we find the story of King David when in the Bible. The Bible says that King David has exactly the same way as Tuthmosis III. He had a city surrounded by his army, and he went to Jerusalem with his men, and he took the Ark of the Lord. Now, every place in the Bible they talk about the Ark of Covenant, which is the Ark of Moses, where Moses put the only time that speak about the Ark of the Lord and not the Ark of the Covenant is when they say that David took the Ark of the Lord into Jerusalem. You see what I mean? Although this indicates that the biblical narrators knew the facts. Only in a confused chronological order, but they had the fact, the historical fact. This is, in history, from history sources, we know that, Tuthmosis III took the Ark of Amun, the Ark of his God, the Ark of the God. And the Bible says he took the Ark of God. It had been assumed that it's the same Ark, but, if you read the Bible again, the only time they mentioned the Ark of God is when David took the Ark into Jerusalem, you see, and not the Ark of the Covenant, because it's a different Ark altogether. Anyhow, again, we find the story. I have to tell you some similarities between the story of David in the Bible and the story of Tuthmosis III. We know, obviously, from what I said, that Tuthmosis III married a woman who had been married to another man, Abraham. This is what we know. We have the same story repeated in a different way in the story of David. They say while David was in Jerusalem waiting for the city to fall down, the surrounding city, he established a kind of a palace or something, and he was on the roof of the palace in the night, and he looked over and he saw next door a woman bathing. Obviously she must be, uncovered, so he saw her body. He saw a woman bathing, so he sent his people to invite her to his place, and he made love to her. Bathsheba, his name is Bathsheba. And this woman was married to a man called Uriah. According to the Bible. And this man was fighting in the army of David in the front battle. So he asked for this man to come, and because she became pregnant after he made love to her. David wanted to hide this fact, so he asked for her husband to come back to sleep with her, so eventually she will think that the child is his son. But when Uriah, the father and the husband of Bathsheba came, he did not go to his house or his woman. He stayed out. He said, I cannot go to my wife while my other, brothers are fighting in the war, in the battlefront. I cannot go there. So in this case, David asked the army to put this, to send him back and put him in the very front in the dangerous area, so he was killed. And David married her. So, the idea of marrying a woman already married to another man, this is repeated. And if you see the very name they choose for the man, Uriah. Uriah means the man from Ur. Uriah, the name given to the husband of Bathsheba, the woman that David married, was called Uriah in the Bible. The man from Ur. We know, obviously, from the Bible that Abraham was the man from Ur. He came from the city of Ur in Babylon. This is what the Bible says. So I mean to say that if you look at the Bible carefully and compare it with what we know in history, we find many details to confirm the story of the thing. And then again, obviously, after the death David did not, although he used the rock, the holy rock, for the worship. He put the ark of his Lord there, and he worshipped there. He never built a temple. He is said to have built a house only. But his son, his successor, King Solomon, who inherited the throne, the empire, it was he who built a house, a palace, and the temple. He inherited. If we look at the story of Solomon in the Bible, and try to find if it did exist in a kind of a similar story from Egyptian sources, we find Amenhotep III, the grandson of Tuthmosis III, is called Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III, in the 14th century BC, inherited the great empire. For the first time, this great empire between, southern, Asia Minor and northern Sudan in Africa, it was an extended empire, and he had to fight no war. So that he had a lot of riches, gold, and his time was the time of art and luxury, and he built many temples and many cities and many statues, huge statues. He was a builder. Now, even before I come to my conclusion, ordinary scholars and even ordinary people, ordinary writers, realize the similarity between Amenhotep III and David and Solomon. King Solomon. Solomon, is supposed to have married the daughter of Pharaoh, as well as some princesses from different parts of the empire. So Amenhotep III married his sister, the heiress, to become on the throne, but he also married other women, other princesses from northern Mesopotamia, from Syria, from different parts. He had Solomon had a large harem section, many women in his harem. Amenhotep III has at least 300 harem in his women in his harem. Even the way the Bible says that Solomon ruled his empire. He divided the empire into 12 different sections, each part paying the tax for the year for the empire. According to modern scholars, study Egyptologists, this exactly was the situation established for the first time by Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III left garrisons, military garrisons in different parts of the empire to keep the empire safe. And strangely enough, Solomon was not given it was given at the time of his birth. Solomon was given the name of Judaida. Solomon's name, original name in the Bible, was Judaida, not Solomon. He became known as Solomon as he is known the King of Peace. So Salam, Shalom is the word for peace, and Solomon is the King of Peace. So he was, his birth name was not Solomon. He was born as Judaida, and he then became named. Amenhotep III is the same. Because, for instance, Jerusalem was known at the time of his grandfather as Kadesh, the holy city. At the time of Amenhotep III, from the letters of Amarna letters, I mean, it became known as Urushalayim. Ur is the city. Urushalayim, the city of peace. So it became known as Urushalayim because he was the king of peace. It is like Israel. Israel, his name was not Israel. It was a title given to him, to Jacob, just before going down to Egypt. Because when Joseph realized that his father was still living in Canaan, he asked his Pharaoh if he can invite his father Jacob and his family to come to Egypt. So according to the Bible, Pharaoh allowed Joseph to bring his family to Egypt. And Jacob, in his old age, came and met Pharaoh and blessed him. Jacob, but because before coming to Egypt, the Lord appeared to him, and he had a conflict with some power, and he's a ladder and so on, and then he was given the title of Yisrael. Yisra means to rule. El is the short of Elohim, the God of Israel. Israel is Elohim rules, exactly in the same way as the Egyptian gods, you see. He was given this title just before he came down to meet Pharaoh in Egypt, you see. So in the same way, the word Solomon was not the original name, but it was given to both Solomon and Amenhotep III, both Judaida and Amenhotep III, because they ruled their empire in peace without any war, having to go through any war. At the same time, you mentioned to me before we started to talk regarding the Temple of Solomon. If the Temple of Solomon, as I came to conclude that the Temple of Solomon, the main temple mentioned in details in the Bible to have been established with the royal palace at the same time as the royal palace by Solomon in Jerusalem. It was in fact in Egypt and not in Jerusalem. However, Solomon himself, Amenhotep III, built another temple in Jerusalem, because what happened is, whenever he had, Amenhotep III, a major city where he had placed a military garrison, an Egyptian military garrison, he also made an Egyptian temple. So in Jerusalem, at the same location of the holy location of the rock, he established an Egyptian, Amenhotep III, historical Solomon, as I think, established a temple. The first temple to be established in Jerusalem was established for his own garrison, Egyptian garrison in the location. Obviously, this was a small shrine, which was eventually vanished, and then after the Persian Empire and so on, the Jews were allowed by the Persian Koresh of Persia to build the temple at the same location. During the 5th century BC, the Jewish temple was established at the same location, which was eventually destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. And the same location, the same position now as the Dome of the Rock. The rock under the dome, it represented the Holy of Holies of the Jewish temple, which was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. And eventually the Muslim caliph built a rock, a dome on top of it. But I believe, to tell you the truth, that now with the new state of Israel, we cannot really expect a state of Israel to be complete without its temple. And I believe eventually when they come to kind of agreement, peace agreement, they should allow the Israelis to rebuild their own temple at the very location of the ancient one, the rock being the Holy of Holies, and instead of making the Temple Mount a point of conflict and fighting by the Muslims and the Jews, in fact, it could be with the mosque, with the mosque at the south of the Temple Mount, and the rock being. They can worship together. If God is one, it has to be one for every one of us. Anyhow, this is a dream. I hope it will be fulfilled. However, what I wanted to tell you that, yes, it was the first temple, a small temple was established. The first temple to be established in Jerusalem was done by Amenhotep III. Again, I have to tell you something important here. It was Amenhotep III who united the two branches of his great ancestor, Amenhotep Tuthmosis III, David, because the descendants of Sarah, through Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and so on, who when they came to Egypt, I believe that Joseph of the Bible, Joseph of the coat of many colors, who was appointed as a minister of Pharaoh, was the same person we know from history as Joseph is Yosef, and Yosef is two parts. Seth is an Egyptian thing, beloved, or something like that. You is Yahweh, the short of Yahweh. So Yuya, the name of Yuya, I've had one of my books, I've identified Yuya, the minister of Amenhotep III, as Joseph of the Bible, of the Bible. What happened now is that Amenhotep III married the daughter of Yuya. Amenhotep III, the descendant of Tuthmosis III through the Egyptian royal palace, royal queen, married the daughter of Yuya, the descendant of Sarah, and Tuthmosis III. He reunited the two branches of his grandfathers, the one coming from Sarah and one coming from the royal queen. He reunited by remarrying the daughter of Yuya, of Joseph. And this union, Amenhotep III had many harem, and many princesses and so on. But he insisted that the daughter of Joseph, the daughter of Yuya, should be his queen, against the custom, Egyptian custom. I think he must have known somehow that this is the descendant of his grandfather. He would not have insisted that the daughter of Yuya, a foreigner, to be his queen, challenge Egyptian traditions, unless he knew. He must have known at the time that Yuya, in fact, was a descendant of Tuthmosis III from Sarah, another, Hebrew woman. He made her his queen. The union between the branch of the royal branch of Tuthmosis III and the Hebrew branch of Tuthmosis III produced the Amarna kings. The Amarna kings. To Akhenaten. Akhenaten, the first monotheistic king. In Egypt, you see, not in the Bible, not in ancient, Mesopotamia or in Persia or in Levant or anywhere else. It was in Egypt during the builders of the pyramids. We know that from the text, the pyramid text. And the book of the dead and so on. It was for the first time that the Egyptians, modern times, from the biblical time until now, we think that God in heaven sent us a prophet to teach us, to give us knowledge that God existed, worship God and don't worship any other thing and so on. Egyptians looked at the thing differently. They looked at nature. They looked at the wonders of nature. They look at the stars. They look at and they tried to know. Nobody told them. They themselves tried to know what is the origin of all these things. Where did it come from? What does it mean? You see. So they were in their research, they recognized from the early time, during the time of the pyramid builders, that man has two dimensions. One physical dimension that vanishes after death, and one spiritual dimension that lives forever, eternally, and they call it Ba. Strangely enough, the spiritual dimension for them is dual, not a single. Ba and Ka. They have. This is a different subject. We don't have to think about it now. But they thought, they believed that humans have two dimensions: one spiritual and one physical, and that the spiritual dimension leaves the body at the time of death. But I have to tell you that recently some scientists have announced that they have filmed some kind of energy leaving the body of a person at the time of his death, a kind of energy. Anyhow, the Egyptians didn't have modern technology, but they believed that at the time of death, some kind of power leaves the body. But this power is eternal. Energy is eternal. It cannot. Energy is God. Really, anyhow, that this is thing. That's why they believe that if you were to keep the body safe through mummification, and keep the body safe through magical spells that they make it on the walls of the tomb, that they believed one day in the future, the spiritual dimension, the spirit, will go back to the body of the person, and the resurrection will take place. This is the first idea of the Egyptian from the time. We don't know where it came from. There's no indication, neither in Africa, nor in Mesopotamia, nowhere else. Where did it come from? We don't know. It must be some kind of magician, magical at the time. Magic is trying to identify the hidden rules of nature. Somebody might somehow recognize that, but we know it did exist from that time. Now, during the time of Tuthmosis, Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten. Akhenaten, again, we have his mother was the daughter of Joseph, the Hebrew, coming from Judea. Was not the heiress, so he had no right to sit on the throne. So his father made him, or his mother really made him to marry the heiress, the daughter of the queen, sister of Amenhotep III, his queen. The reason that the royal family, the king, the prince married his sister is to keep the throne within the royal family. Ordinary Egyptians did not marry their sisters. It's only the royal family, because whoever marries the heiress, the eldest daughter of Pharaoh, has the right to sit on the throne, succeed him. So that's why the prince married his sister. Amenhotep III married his sister first, then married the daughter of Julia, whom I identify as Joseph. And his sister produced Nefertiti, so who became the heiress. So in fact, Akhenaten had to marry Nefertiti, the heiress, in order to be able to be associated as a co-regent with his father, Amenhotep III. He became a co-regent with his father, Amenhotep III. However, even then, the priests of Amun did not accept him as a legitimate son of Amun, and they did not accept his legitimate rule of Egypt. So it seems here, this is again, something we don't know where it came from. We have to identify that some people have some, call it intelligence, call it, some kind of intuition. I don't know how, but some people have a way of getting knowledge of things that other people cannot know. So at that time, being challenged that he is not the legitimate son of Amun, Akhenaten came to recognize, to announce. What he announced is that as a human being is composed, the entity of a human being is composed by two different elements, one physical and one spiritual. Even the cosmos, the universe, also have a spiritual dimension. He made a symbol of it as the ray of light coming from the sun, and he called it Shu. Shu means the ray of light. He called his Aten. Aten is his son. Aten means the ray of light. If you look at the Old Testament, New Testament, and the Quran, you find that they call God is light. They identify God as light. Even new physicists, the God as the energy, as energy. You see, Akhenaten he's a unique person in the history of mankind. He was the first from history sources to identify a universal, spiritual power. Without Akhenaten identifying this, Plato, who came 5 centuries later, would not have been able to recognize that the two natures of universe. Only Plato made the physical existence as a shadow of the spiritual existence. But without Akhenaten, neither the monotheistic religion or religions would have appeared, nor even philosophy, Greek philosophy like Plato and so on. So it was a unique, the union between the two branches of David, Tuthmosis III, from the Hebrew Sarah, and from the Egyptian royal family, produced the revolution, a spiritual revolution again, with the Amarna kings. Akhenaten saying that God is one. Again, if you read my books, I have come to identify Akhenaten as the historical Moses. After, although he was forced to abdicate the throne eventually, and Tutankhamun succeeded him on the throne, and so on. Now, if you were to look at the temple of the Solomon temple, the Bible says that in Jerusalem, David built simultaneously 2 major buildings. He sent to the Phoenician king of Tyre, Lebanon now, Phoenician king of Tyre, he sent for him because the Phoenicians have cedar wood, good wood to use in building, to send him some wood or cedar wood and some builders to help him build the temple of God in Jerusalem and his royal palace simultaneously. And it took many years for this to be there. And this is what the Bible says. In reality, when in this case, Jerusalem was excavated by British, by Americans, by everybody, by the Israelis recently, and nobody ever found, evidence of either a palace, a royal palace, at any stage, at any level, or a temple, a great temple as explained, described in the Bible. With two pillars in front of the two great pillars in front of the temple. This temple was not found there at all. No evidence of that. However, if you look at Amenhotep III built many temples. He built the Luxor temple, a great temple. He built a temple in Nubia, a great temple of Solib. He built different temples. And he built, as I told you before, some small temples in Jerusalem and in other areas of the empire, not only in Egypt. But his great work, up to the time of Amenhotep III of the 18th dynasty, the royal family, the royal palaces used to be in a city called Memphis, near Saqqara of today, not far from Cairo, modern Cairo. Memphis was the royal residence, and Saqqara was the metropolis of the city, where the tombs are done, you see. But Amenhotep III decided to build a temple on the west bank of Thebes, Luxor, on the west bank of Thebes. There he got a great building of a great palace, royal palace. Markata is called Markata. Next to it, he built a great temple. And if you look at the description of the royal, these archaeologists have found, obviously these things are not standing now, but roots and, parts of it have been found by American, especially American archaeologists who dug there. And they confirm the nature of the royal palace and the temple was built there. He built the temple for his own self, because the Egyptians believed that as long after death, as long as the name is mentioned, they live. The name was part of the identity, part of the spirit. As long as people mention your name, you are alive. If you are forgotten, then you are dead. So the kings used to build mortuary temple, that the name will be mentioned in this temple all the time after their death, to keep them alive. So Amenhotep III built a great palace, royal palace, exactly in the same way described in the Bible, and a great temple exactly in the same way described in the Bible. You will find details of both in my book, very detailed of the same thing. Now, the two pillars, a pillar is a stone, kind of standing stone thing. You cannot, the pillars in the Bible are given different names. Joachim and they're giving names, and names mean different identity, and a stone cannot have a name or identity. And you find the only thing standing, the main thing standing from the temple of Amenhotep III at Western Thebes now, we can see now, it has always been there since then, as the colossal statues of Memnon. They call the statues of Memnon. 2 images of Amenhotep III himself, only in different shapes. That's why they have different names. Again, because the Egyptians, as I told you, they have the spiritual person have a split. Ka and the Ba. The Egyptian believed in the duality of the spiritual nature, and that's why they have the same king giving 2 different identity names and 2 different, which is standing, and you can go and see it. It's very high. At the time, of it was built, and until now, the first rays of the sun appearing on the horizon go straight to the level of the eyes of the 2 statues. The first light to enlighten Thebes was to go to the eyes, to be seen by the eyes of the 2 statues. This is the 2 statues. Then again, if you look at the Hiram and Hiram Abif, the Bible says that the king of Tyre, who was contacted by David first and by Solomon after that, to help building the temple, was called Hiram, King Hiram. If you look at from the history side, at any king of the Tyre had a very close connection with the Egyptian pharaonic palace from the very early times. Blocks of wood, cedar wood, came from Tyre to the time of the builders of the temple, of the pyramids. From the time of the Tyre is the nearest Phoenician city to Egypt, and Tyre had a first connection from the very beginning with the Egyptian pharaonic family, and their wood was cedar wood was used for the boat, holy boat found next to the buried next to the Great Pyramid of Giza, at Giza. So the connection between Tyre. But if you look from history sources to a king of Tyre that is named Hiram, there's none existed. Yeah. The only source you can find is from Josephus. But Josephus, who lived in the 1st century AD and witnessed the destruction of the temple, Jewish temple of Jerusalem by the Romans, you can trust Josephus, who wrote his story when he went to Rome to write his books. You can trust him for anything he witnessed himself. Whatever he saw himself, he was talking about how Romans attacked Jerusalem, how they destroyed Jerusalem, and so on. You can trust that because he was a witness of the events. But when he talks about events that took place about 1,300 years before, he was relying on some other biblical story. So from history sources, only Josephus mentioned this Hiram of Tyre, but no historical source, no archaeological evidence have ever found a king called Hiram in Phoenician Tyre. But what we know, what we know is from the Bible, is that the king of Tyre, Hiram of Tyre, sent with the builders he sent, with the workers he sent, he also sent an architect who had the same name as the king, Hiram. Only thing is, his name was Hiram Abif. And for the Masons, this name is very important because the Masons believe in the temple. They do the worship according to the ancient, what they think the ancient rituals of Solomon. and the Hiram Abif they regard being the architect of the Temple of Solomon. They believe that it must have been, this Hiram Abif is the grandmaster. Now, if you look at, all what we know here is that Hiram, the architect Hiram, has the similar name as the king, Hiram, the king. Okay. Abif means his father. Hiram Abif means Hiram, son of his father. This is what it means. If we look at the builder, the great architect who built the temple of Amenhotep III, the temple, Mortuary Temple on the west bank of Thebes, we know the great man called Amenhotep, son of Habu. Amenhotep, son of Habu. This man for some time he was forgotten, but he was remembered for a millennium and a half after his death. He was worshipped a millennium and a half after his death. He was forgotten because the Church of Rome changed put an end to his memory. Anyhow, this is not the time for that. What I want to say that his name is Hiram. His name is Amenhotep, son of Habu. So in this way, he has a similar name to the king, but not the king of Tyre. He has a similar name to the king of Egypt, Amenhotep, the third, Amenhotep, son of Habu. If you look at son of Habu, the second part of his name, Habu was his father. So Amenhotep, son of Habu, means Amenhotep, son of his father. Hiram Abif, Hiram, son of his father. Amenhotep, son of his father. And if you look at the word Hiram here, Hiram is written in the Bible in three different ways. The vowels change. Huram, Hurum, and so on, but the consonants don't change. H-R-M. H-R-M. If H-R-M, if you add an S at the end, it becomes H-R-M-S, Hermes. Hermes. Hermes is the god, the name, a Greek name for the god, Egyptian god of magic, for the Egyptian god of healing, for the Egyptian god of knowledge, which is called in Egyptian Tuhut. Tuhut was the Egyptian Tuhut, you see. And the Masonic, although the Masonic, memory, regard Hiram Abif, the Phoenician from Tyre, as the great architect, they also, they don't know why, regard Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes Trismegistus, as the great architect. Obviously, they would not be, they may not be able to connect. How can one from Tyre and one, Hermes is an Egyptian, the Greek name for an Egyptian deity, you see. But it was this Hermes, Hermes, if we say son of Habu, it's the same Egyptian builders who built the temple of Hamu. He himself became known as the son of Hermes, the son of Tuhut. And the king, Amenhotep III, the king made a statue of him two statues, in fact, that were found by the archaeologists in modern times inside the Karnak temple. Two statues. And this is the first time in history we know of mediators, of human mediators between mankind and the deities and gods. Hermes, people used to go to the statues of Amenhotep, son of Habu, in the Karnak, and pray to him, asking him, and the modern archaeologists found all the things, some written texts attached to his statues and attached to his praise. Many texts from the time of Amenhotep III up to the time of the Romans, more than 1,300 years. 1,500 years. All the time, written in different times, in hieroglyphic and in Greek and in Roman text, all the way through 1,500 years. People went to the statues of Hermes, to the statues of son of Habu, asking him, to cure the children, or to make them successful in something, or they asked him to mediate with God. He was the first mediator, the first one to be identified as the healer, and the sign of healing was attached, the serpent sign of healing was attached to his name. A long time after his death, a long time at the very beginning of the Christian era, when the Romans came to Egypt, when Augustus came to Egypt and defeated Cleopatra and Antony in Alexandria 30 years BC. Both of them died. Both of them committed suicide. The Romans, only kept the temple of Serapis, the Serapeum of Alexandria, but they did not care of any other temple of Egypt. They did not spend money on the temples. So all the temples of Egypt were closed down because there was no money. They did not close the temples, but they did not spend any money, and they took the money, the treasury of the temples, it closed down. So people at the time, the Egyptians, are very close they very close to belief, religious belief. So they went out. They left their homes, their families, and they went out to worship in the desert, to meditate and worship, looking for salvation. They called. It was. They were known as the Serapeute. At the very beginning of, they became known as the Serapeute. Philo, the Jewish author who lived in Alexandria at the time, wrote, the only text we have details about them comes from Philo. He says the men and women, young and old, they came and stayed each one on his own. They ate the minimum and they drank water and they prayed, and then they gathered together one day in a week and they took, and they, in a way, they were the first Gnostics. Gnostics are people who were looking for knowledge, but with not the scientific knowledge. It was not knowledge of the world, the physical world. It was knowledge of self, knowledge of the spiritual world, knowledge for salvation. You see, and as I told you before, ancient Egyptians believed that in order to have the possibility of resurrection after death is to have your body mummified and buried with a copy of the Book of the Dead. And this was a very expensive job for ordinary peasants and people of Egypt. So they had no chance for the second life. They were not mummified. Only rich people were able to afford mummification. But then, after the death of Tutankhamun, really, a new kind of cult, a new kind of a spiritual and ritual, appeared, developed within the cult of Isis. Isis, the mother of Horus, who brought back from the dead Osiris. Within the cult of Isis, it took a long time, really, to develop. What only came to be materialized, at the very early time of the Christian era, before the Christian message, really as it is now in the gospel, appeared. That if you were to be, to go down into Nile water, to cleanse your body and yourself from Nile water, to leave the whole thing, take out everything from you and come out of water and confess. Realization, you are reborn again. So the knowledge they were looking for was, okay, Akhenaten said God is one and God universal, God is light. But we, how are we related to God? It was only then, through these Gnostics, people looking for salvation, that they came to realize that within themselves, the spirit, within each person's self, within themselves, is part of the universal God of heaven.
Yeah,
it is there and then.
Yeah, what you've done, is amazing, because you've taken, all of the what people are looking for now is not a neat, tied up in one little package story, but is you've given them the filaments, the fragments of where the story came from, but the message is the same, and it's amazing that we're all one. We all come from one source, and that there's no need to battle because of belief systems, because the foundational material all came from the same place. So we are one family.
Religion now has come to be a dogma. A dogma.
Yes.
Something. Nothing is spiritual. The first people who realize that, once you see that, you realize that you are God. You are part with God. That there is no God, no death. It's eternal to the universal power. It was a joy. It was Christianity came out of that. And first Christians were dancing in the street. They faced death. They didn't fear death because there was no death for them. They became united with the spiritual thing even before they died. It was there, and then they discovered what we lack now is the spiritual dimension. We completely are, faced with dogmas and things. That's why we turn to enemies. We turn to, we are destroying nature. Ancient Egyptian regarded nature as sacred. They regarded the cat and the dog and the crocodile and the mountain and the Nile and the sun and as holy. They wanted to keep nature. This is a womb. We are destroying our womb. We have lost our spiritual feeling. We have lost. New religion took us far away from our religion, spiritual understanding. We are lost. Without the spiritual realization, we are completely lost. We are destroying ourselves.
Well, that's what's so wonderful about these times, though, because people are beginning to search. They are beginning to question. They are beginning to look for a source and not a dogma. They're looking for a feeling instead of a philosophy. And I think that your work now is so important, even more so than when it was first published, because people are open to understanding the material that you've given. It isn't, it's not heretical. It's this is how it happened, and at some point in time, it was woven into one story to give people the idea that there's only one way, but there's many ways, and it's the spiritual aspect that goes into all of this that creates the magic that is spiritual, that takes us back to the source. So you're opening people's hearts and minds.
I mean, to tell you the truth, I came to that. Not. I mean, it took me a long time. It took me a long time because I was brought up within different communities, and I have my dogmas and my taboos, and I mean, it took me a long time to be cleansed myself and to be able to see what really have been lost through these ages. We have to be free again. We have to be able to see within ourselves. I mean, God is not out there; it is inside. God, I mean,
that's right.
If God is one, it is not one for me. It is one for all of us. And for the Hindus and the Japanese and the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims and the Africans, God is one for everybody. I mean, we cannot fight. Each one has a different God to fight. I mean, if the universal power is in all of us, then we are brothers. We are brothers not only with ourselves. We are brothers with our nature as well. We are destroying nature. We are destroying nature. We are destroying our womb. I mean, I think, I am thank you, first of all, to have been giving me the chance to talk to people, because I am getting old and I am afraid to leave this world without my message being, people have to know at least what I want to, they decide for themselves. But at least they have to know how, at the end of all this journey, about 50 years of research, I have come to, from very historical, archaeological research into kind of realizing what is behind, what is lost, what the magic we have lost. We have lost the magic.
Well, I think you're helping to put people on the track to find that magic. We're down to like 2 minutes, so I have to thank you, but I do want to also ask you if, after I've read some more of your books, if you'll come back and talk some more with me.
I'll be very happy to talk to you. I'll be very happy to talk to you about all my books, because I want to share with all people what I know. Obviously, people have to make up their mind their own self, but at least I have to share with them what I spent a lot of time and effort to know. Because you see,
someone once said that a word doesn't begin to live until it's spoken. So, and you're speaking it, and it's out there, and it's out there forever. And people are going to find it. And, this time, this decade, next decade, they'll find it. And they'll weave it together, and they'll make the magic happen again. And I'm so grateful that you were here today and that you shared your wisdom with us. And I look forward to having you back.
Thank you. I'll be ready whenever you want me.
Got to read some books first, but I will certainly be in touch with you. I urge everybody to please check out his books. They're fabulous. They'll make you think. They'll make you